Hello, church. Over the past few months, a phrase that has kept popping into my head time and time again is trust and obey. Trust and obey is a prominent theme running right through the Bible. The definition of trust is a firm belief or faith in another. And obey is to follow someone's commands or wishes. The Bible tells us that when we trust completely in Jesus and obey his word and guidance for our lives, we will be blessed with his peace. Isaiah 26 verse 3 says, "You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you." An old hymn has these words, "When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. When we do his good will, he abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey." Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Let me ask you, who do you really trust? A family member, or maybe a friend who you can totally rely on, someone who has over time gained your trust by supporting you and being there for you through thick and thin. Every one of us who has walked the Christian life with Jesus will be able to look back and remember many times and in many different circumstances when Jesus has helped and supported us through tough times, when he has guided and strengthened us and carried us through when we had no idea what to do next. He is always with us at all times in every situation we face, and that's why we can trust him completely. We have to learn to obey him and not to try to do things our own way. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." The Bible is littered with people who proved this verse to be true time and time again. People who trusted God and obeyed his word and his leading. The story of Ruth is about how God works in and through the ordinary circumstances of life. There are no spectacular signs and wonders. The characters of the story are common, ordinary folks in an ordinary setting. Ruth's story is set in quite a treacherous time between the death of Joshua and the beginning of King Saul's reign. It was a time of political instability. Immorality was rife, and God's people had turned from him to worship idols. It was a time when everyone did as they saw fit. A famine came upon the land of Judah, the promised land, and many believe it was God's hand of punishment for their unfaithfulness. A married couple, Elimelech and Naomi, lived in Bethlehem with their 2 sons, and they decided to relocate to Moab, where food was plentiful. They didn't trust God to provide for them, and basically decided to sort things out for themselves. Not long after moving to Moab, Naomi becomes a widow, and she has to raise her 2 sons all by herself. Instead of returning home to Bethlehem, she remains in Moab and lives there for 10 years, taking on their culture and their way of life. Settled in Moab, her 2 sons marry Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. God had commanded the Jews not to live in or marry people from neighbouring nations. Disaster befalls them when Naomi's 2 sons also die. Naomi now has no descendants, no security, no male to provide for her or Ruth or Orpah. She's a picture of the hopeless and the poor. Naomi has made a series of bad decisions directly against God's guidance and laws for his people. Back in Bethlehem, there is now food in abundance, and Naomi prepares to return home, and Ruth insists on going with Naomi to Bethlehem. Naomi blames God for what has happened to her, and in Ruth 1 verses 20 and 21 it's clear that she's very bitter towards God. "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." We become bitter towards God and other people and harbour anger and disappointment within us when we feel that we're being treated unfairly. Naomi felt bitter that God had treated her unfairly. She seems to forget that she failed to trust God to provide for her and her family, and blatantly disobeyed God's laws by moving from the promised land to Moab, and then to take on their God, their culture, and to allow her 2 sons to marry Moabite women. We all face difficulties from time to time, and it's easy to blame God or other people for it. Hebrews 12 verse 15 warns us, "See to it that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble." Ephesians 4 verse 31, "Get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger." Because bitterness can eat us up. It grows and eats us up. Naomi's return to Bethlehem ends her journey of bad decisions and disobedience. It marks a new beginning for her. In a land that God described as flowing with milk and honey, God also commanded the Israelites to care for the poor people living among them. At harvest time, they were told not to harvest everything in their fields of crops, so that the poor and needy could glean leftovers to feed themselves. Ruth volunteers to glean to get food for her and Naomi to survive. Ruth's choice of field is pretty random. Or is it? She finds herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, a godly, humble, wealthy and influential man who was a key person in the ancestry of King David. We read that Boaz makes it his business to notice and provide for the strangers and the poor who have come into his fields to glean. And he notices Ruth, who is working hard and for long hours in his field. We have 2 opposites here. Boaz, wealthy, influential, Israelite, landowner, a humble, God-fearing man who has compassion for the poor. Ruth is a destitute Moabite widow. She is a hard worker and is devoted to Naomi. Both of them have faith and trust in God and seek to live a godly life. In Mosaic law, it is stipulated that a well-to-do, close relative known as a guardian redeemer was to help a destitute family member. It turns out that Boaz is a close relative, a guardian redeemer to Ruth and Naomi, but he isn't the closest relative. However, the nearer relative declines the offer of becoming guardian redeemer, and Boaz happily takes on that role. Boaz marries Ruth, and God blesses them with a son, Obed, who the Bible tells us is the grandfather of King David and is named in the bloodline, the genealogy of Jesus himself. The book of Ruth celebrates God's sovereign plan, his power, his protection, and his provision. Have you noticed the coincidences in this story, or the God incidences? Ruth chooses to stay with Naomi, to leave her native home, her culture, and chooses to accept God, Yahweh, as her God. The field Ruth chooses to glean in belongs to Boaz. Boaz notices Ruth out of all the other people gleaning in his fields. Boaz provides for Ruth as someone poor and in need of help. The closest relative to Naomi and Ruth declines his right to be their guardian redeemer. Boaz is happy to take on the role of guardian redeemer and to marry Ruth. Ruth was childless in her first marriage, but has a son with Boaz named Obed. Obed is the grandfather of King David and is part of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. God's invisible hand is directing ordinary people like you and me, who love him, to accomplish his divine purposes. All we need to do is trust and obey. Do you believe that God's promises are true and that he is still working his plans out in ordinary people today? Look back over the past year or so and consider God's plan and his hand in setting up the Manor House. He put his plan into the hearts of Mark and Tony. He provided a premises and the wherewithal to make that premises fit for purpose. He provided racking and furniture. He provided items of food to stock the pantry and has continued to do so since it opened. He provided volunteer workers to run the pantry and has kept everyone safe. He provided grants and donations to keep Manor House open. He has laid the work of Manor House on people's hearts to support and pray for its work. He has provided the members who are in need right now. But why? God knew that there would be many poor and needy people in our community at an unprecedented time like this that would need help and support from us. I pray that we will all acknowledge God's sovereign plan, his protection, his power and his provision in our own personal lives and in that of Bethel Church and the Manor House Pantry. It's a wonderful privilege that we have and a great promise from our God that his plan for us is to prosper us and to give us hope and a future, individually and as a church. God knows what the future will bring. All we have to do is trust and obey. God bless you all and thank you for listening.